Welcome to Healing Voices Project, where we share stories of addiction, grief, recovery, and courage. And also from people who work every day in the field of substance abuse who discuss their experiences and advice. I'm Mike Torville, your host. Thank you all for joining us. Well, welcome back, everybody, to Healing Voices Project. We're really glad you're here, glad you're visiting with us, and we have another episode with another very special guest today, our friend Rebecca Hellman. Rebecca and I have been talking, a long time about trying to get this going because Rebecca's got a lot to talk about. And give you a quick background on Rebecca before we get into a conversation. Rebecca Hellman, going back, has completed her master's in social work from Boston University way back in 1997. So you've been in the field for well over 20 years now. And you're still young, which is wonderful.
So young.
Yeah. And with your 20 years plus experience, you've been treating people in public high schools, mental health centers, and sober living facilities. But currently, you're a lead clinician at the Herren Project, which Rebecca's been there for 6 years now. But in addition to the work at the Herren Project, Rebecca has a private practice in Plymouth, Massachusetts, specializing in treating people with addiction, anxiety disorders, trauma, and grief. And that's a lot to take on. But in addition to that, Rebecca's got 2 children, a 16-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son that keeps you very busy, right?
Loves of my life, absolutely.
And in the midst of all that, you find time to do some biking and running, and you even squeezed in a few marathons, right?
I have completed 5 marathons.
5. You know what's amazing? The 5 marathons is pretty impressive, but I think just the training and the time-consuming training for that it's a lot. It's a lot. So I always run to raise money for a charity. First marathon I actually ran to raise money for the Herren Project. But I always think that whatever charity I'm raising money for, the people benefiting from it put in far more work and much more pain than 26 miles. So I can muster through 26 miles and a lot of training if it's going to help somebody going forward. And that's pretty commendable, because I know the training for that is day after day after day. It's running 26 miles for training isn't something you just say, I think I'll run a quick 26 miles in a half hour. It's a big chunk of your day.
It is. And it's well worth it in the end. Our executive director at the Herren Project, Bonnie Sawyer, is actually running Boston this year, and she's not a runner. She's never ran. So she's in the midst of that training process right now, as we're 12 days away from the marathon. So.
Wow. Yeah. She'll need a good rest after that.
Yep.
Which, well, thanks again with all the things that you've got going on, to spend some time with us here at the Healing Voices. And there's so many things I know that we could talk about. So I guess I could start at the beginning, because when you graduated from Boston in 1997 at Boston University, 25 years almost now.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Might have that go by fast, didn't it?
It sounds so long ago when you say the year, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, but in that time, and I guess what I don't know, I thought I'd ask you, what drew you to that line of work to begin with?
So when I graduated with my master's in social work, I immediately started working in high schools. I adore teenagers. I think it's a great age group to try to affect in a positive way. So I worked in public high schools for many, many years. At some point, I wanted to try out mental health facilities or mental health clinics. And what I found when I worked in those settings is that there were a number of groups that were not clinicians weren't eager to work with certain populations. And I wanted the experience, so I took any referrals that came my way. So what I found was I was getting um, grief work and people in active addiction. So from there, led me to a one particular client along the way, but really led me to the passion of wanting to work with people with addictions, and then therefore people in recovery, and then therefore their families.
Mhm. And I think the family aspect is something important we talk about a lot about, and that's sometimes, I don't say the forgotten group, but focusing on the person going through addiction and how many people are affected by one person's addiction, you know?
The ripple effect.
Yeah, it is. And with the work you've been doing there, what brought you to the Herren Project?
Oh, I don't know. It feels like it was organic in the way that I had heard Chris's story. When I was working in working with a sober home or recovery home, I would frequently bring the women to hear him. He's charismatic. He has a great story, and he could really reach a lot of people. So I would try to get them out in the community, the women out in the community, to hear him. So I knew of his story. I played basketball when I was younger. It, it felt like a great organization to reach out to and raise money for. So which I started running for Team Herren Project, and met people who at the time, a different executive director, and Kristen Young, who was our clinical director. And I asked if they ever needed any kind of clinical help. I would love to be able to, you know, do some work there. And they immediately said, let's do some groups, to which I jumped on. And so 6 years ago, I started my first 2 groups. We would do them all on Zoom. So they've always been on Zoom or online,
Mhm.
so we can reach people all over the country. My first one was a family support group. So any family member who has a loved one who is either actively using or actively in recovery, or anywhere in between, could join a family support group. I started one of those, and then I started our very first grief support group for family members who had lost a loved one to overdose, addiction, alcoholism. Um, and it has grown tremendously from there, but those were my first 2.
Yeah, and I remember seeing Chris Herren speak at a high school nearby here. And you're right. And one of the things I've noticed in watching some of the other sessions is when Chris is talking, the room is silent. You could hear a pin drop. And there's something about the effect of his story that just shuts everybody up,
Yes.
you know?
Yes. I mean, he was an amazing basketball player for sure.
Yeah.
I'm not taking anything away, but I think that his speaking actually has a greater effect on many more people than his basketball career. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful that he can get 800 kids in an auditorium to be quiet and hear his every word.
Yeah. And I think part of it too, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, but part of it is when I was invited to an event where he was speaking in Agawam. And I didn't know much about Chris Herren, but I knew a little bit, but not a lot. And so I went and I listened to his story, and he talked about he's not shy about it, that's for sure. Talked about every little thing. And I thought about it and I thought, my goodness, there's so many people who have stories that don't know where to tell them. They don't have a platform. They don't have an ability to say, oh, I'm going to write down my story and what then and how. And it always stuck with me. And that's partly what inspired this whole podcast, is from that little seed to say, there are so many people, and that's what inspired even the book that we've talked about, The Voices from the Fallen. When you have people with the ability to share their stories, and many of those stories are very compelling. And certainly they broke me up quite a bit, but I got to give some thanks and credit to Chris's session there to spark it in me to do that. So that was You never know. That's
You
what
never,
happens.
and I'm very grateful every day that he is able to do what he does so well, which then allows me to be able to do the work that I
Right.
can.
Right. And actually, while we're, because if anybody doesn't know much about the Herren Project, do you want to give a quick overview what the whole organization is about and what you guys do?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. So the Herren Project is a nonprofit organization founded by Chris and his wife Heather. Over 10 years now. I think we just celebrated 10 years. And it was a way for Chris to give back what was given to him. He tells of another former player, Chris Mullen, and his wife Liz, who were able to help him get into treatment and provide him that opportunity. And in recovery, you don't get to keep what you don't give away. So he has always wanted to give back, and the nonprofit is that way of being able to reach thousands of families and people who are either looking to get into treatment or support or prevent. Now we're into prevention and education. So we've been around for over 10 years and we've grown exponentially, even more so in the pandemic, like many other mental health, and addiction services have.
Mhm. Yeah. Even you were growing pre-pandemic, and you said you were ahead of everybody with the Zoom before that.
I know we actually had to make some changes because everybody had then during the pandemic started using Zoom. And so we had to, kind of up it a bit. We weren't ready for, it had been smaller groups or, and then everybody started using Zoom. We had to beware of Zoom crashers and, people,
Yeah.
things that didn't exist prior, but it's a gift to be able to reach people all over the country for sure.
Yeah. And you have different organizations within the Herren Project, right?
So the Herren brand Chris has Herren Talks, and that is the portion of the Herren brand which is his speaking. And then there's Herren Wellness, which is his facility. He has actually two, one in Massachusetts and one in Virginia, where there is recovery services provided, residential. And then there's Herren Project, which is the nonprofit.
Wow, that's a lot. So you are growing, and not just with your exposure all over the country, but your staff is growing too.
Yes. Well, and so for the Herren Project, I think there used to be, it probably started with about 4. I think when I joined, there may have been like 7 of us, and I was on a staff meeting this week, and there were 22. That doesn't include our recovery coaches, our group facilitators. So for a little small nonprofit out of Rhode Island, it's, we're getting there.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, it hasn't been that long, right?
Nope.
And you work with people. I know you with your private practice too, and you focus on the same type of issues with the Herren Project with your private practice. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's to me, it's always been important for me to remember the people still either in active addiction or in early recovery who need that support.
Yeah.
And so I'm able to do that in my private practice.
Yeah. And I think about when you talk about active addiction, and I think what I've learned a lot in the past year or two is people with active addiction and how their families cope with it, what they do, what information do they have to make better decisions? How do they know if they're going too far with enabling or taking the hard stand? And that's always tough. How do you work through that with a family who's saying, well, what do we do now?
It's I think every family's dilemma at some point is the fine line between enabling and helping. And I think every family has to come to that decision on their own. There's no hard line on what is enabling and what's not. I think it's, are you providing your loved one the ability to stay sick? Or are you providing your loved one the ability to be well? And I think, again, that looks different for every family.
Yeah.
It certainly is a dilemma. And like I said earlier, the ripple effect. So,
Yeah. And I think the ripple effect too, which I think, and we've talked a lot about mental illness, trauma, PTSD, sexual abuse, and how much those things contribute. Um, they contribute so much. It's a huge factor in substance abuse. And if you could magically remove all of those things, how I wonder what it would look like. Because I think even with the people that I've met with and spoken about, and every guest who tells their story on the podcast, or every person who is featured in the book, there's often some unresolved matter that stems from earlier trauma or mental illness or PTSD.
mm,
And that seems, if there was a way, $1 million question, to nip that early on,
sure.
you could
So
solve too many problems.
oh, absolutely. I would love to put myself out of a job for sure. I would, that would be amazing. I think early on, since I have been doing this for over 20 years, early on, I noticed a pattern in the clients that I would treat. And there seemed to be three components that I used to call it the trifecta, in a Venn diagram, the three components that then overlapped. One was some predisposition. So whether that was genetic or family behavior or some family systems, a predisposition. The second circle was, I used to say it was trauma. And then over time, I've kind of reworded it in my own brain to just emotional regulation or dysregulation. So the inability for somebody to be able to regulate their emotions in a healthy way. And then the third, that final circle, I've always listed as access. So access to substances. So if we think about risk, to me, somebody or a family with all of them is at a greater risk. So there's some kind of predisposition that they may have, whether that's genetic or just learned behavior. The inability to regulate emotions. So then therefore using something outside of themselves to change the way they feel. And then the third being the access to substance, which over these last 20 years for sure has increased greatly. So I kind of, that is my model. And I think to myself, okay, so I can't change genetic predisposition. And as much as I would like to be able to change access, I'm, if that's the magic wand I want, that for sure. But the ability to regulate emotions is something that I think we can focus on. That is the mental health component, which is helping children early on in life be able to tolerate being frustrated, learning to ask for help, develop coping skills, those kinds of things, so that when things become difficult or when there is trauma or when there is abuse, there is a skill set that we have to be able to combat that. Not everybody who has had a trauma then becomes addicted. So there's a way in which, that's the one area I feel like I can affect. The other two I feel more helpless in, but that's kind of my way of, that's how I've always understood people who are using or who are active. So
That makes sense. And I think when you said that using your skill set, and then for you, it's 20, I don't keep reminding you of that, but 20 plus years.
I see the gray hair every time you say it.
But if you, with that skill set, and I think then, and that goes back to what we often say, a lot of parents, and I just use parents because it could be brothers, sisters, family members, friends, who don't have the skill set. They've never encountered this before. They don't know what to do. So turning to somebody who has the experience like yourself can be extremely helpful, more so than what people might anticipate, because they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
Right.
And no one is immune. I mean, I can know all the things. And I have two teenagers, and my two teenagers are not immune, because I happen to know. I certainly think if my kids were to ever to choose to make some of those decisions or struggle in a way that many do, I would just know the resources to provide them. But no one is immune to that, for sure. We can do the best we can to prevent it,
Mhm.
and give people skills and teach children to reach out and ask for help and be able to communicate and express themselves. But no one's immune, unfortunately, to this.
Yeah.
This disease does not discriminate.
And it is so easy to say, just reach out, but it's hard for a person, let's say a teenager. And again, I have two granddaughters, they're 16 and 14, same ages as your kids. And my grandson's 12. And so certainly there's a concern there about
Sure.
access. And if
Yes.
there is some issues at school, it could be something troubling, could be bullying, or a number of things that you want your child to be able to talk to you about. Years ago, when I was younger, I wouldn't talk to my parents about any of that stuff.
Same.
And I'm glad it's changing. It seems to be
Yes.
changing, and I think you're right. That's the thing that the earlier you catch it. And I know in watching some of Chris Herren's talks, getting this the earlier the better, and preventing it from starting in the first place is the goal, obviously. And starting with the 14, 15, the high school age kids.
Mhm. I would even say earlier. I mean, so I currently work in a high school still as well. And I feel like by the time they're in high school, they already have been exposed to or have had access to some
Mhm.
things. I am always thrilled when there's a teenager who reaches out and says, I need help, or I'm struggling with this, whether it's addiction yet or just, tolerating frustrations and anxiety and depression, things like that. But I think early on for kids in elementary school to be able to learn skills in wellness and self-care and expression, and articulating emotions, I think that's worth its weight in gold. If we could, if all kids, even early on, knew that there was an adult that they could go and talk to and share their thoughts and feelings with, I think that'd be amazing.
And if you talk to your kids and talk about, in advance of any exposure they might have, so when they are exposed to it, they say, my mom talked to me about this, and I'm already, it's not going to traumatize them, or they're going to understand a little bit more having talked to them in advance.
Yeah. I mean, I've always talked to my kids about it. They know what I do for work. My daughter's a youth ambassador for Herren Project as well, but I remember having those discussions with them really early on about substances and drugs and feelings and altering the way you feel with something else, whether that's in a positive way in terms of if I run, I feel better. If I work out, I feel better. Sing or draw or whatever it is that you can do that changes how you feel. That's wonderful. If we're using a substance to change how you feel, there's more danger in that.
Of course, yeah. And then on top of that, the access, like you talked about. I asked my granddaughter, how easy would it be if you wanted, this or that? She said, pretty easy. And she didn't share all the details. Here's who to call, but she did say, look, it would take me an hour and I could get what I want. Yeah, easy. Now, going back to your daughter, who's a youth ambassador, tell us what that means and what she does. Yeah.
It's an amazing program. So we have a youth engagement person on staff. She's an incredible young lady, Natalie, and she has under her youth ambassadors from all over the country who kind of spread the word about wellness, and most of them have Herren Project clubs in their schools,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of our prevention and education programs. And so youth ambassadors from all over, you have to apply. There's an interview, process that goes with it. And so the youth ambassadors meet regularly. They do like community projects and spread wellness within their own communities. Mm-hmm. So it's very cool.
You said a lot of high schools have Herren Project clubs, right? And
Yeah, I think we're over, and I don't have the exact numbers. And so Jill Moriarty, who was our person in terms of prevention and education at the Herren Project, I probably should have called her beforehand, but it's over 200 schools across the country that have Herren Project clubs in them. So that would be, there's a faculty advisor and then a group of students that participate in just active wellness, in promoting wellness in their communities. So
right, that's a great program. And if
yeah,
somebody wanted to find out about how they can get their school or community involved with it, who would they reach out to?
Jill, Jill or Trisha, but I would say Jill at herrenproject.org.
So if they go to herrenproject.org and they can find,
herrenproject.org, you can find it all. So
you're there too.
yeah, yep. So on our website there are certainly ways to get involved, which would be, you know, Herren Project clubs or our team Herren Project if somebody wanted to do a walk or a run or some activity. There's links there to our treatment team who helps with placement of individuals into treatment. Our family support services, which I oversee, our clinical services. So it's all in there. We have recovery, online recovery meetings nightly, Monday through Friday. So it links to all of that are on the webpage.
And it's .org, not .com, right?
Yeah. .org. Yes. Yep.
Well, that's great, and I'd want to find out more about that too, because where my grandkids go to school, I don't know if you're in that school or not, but with
yes, and if we're not, they can start one.
A high school student can start one.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. They just have to find an advisor, somebody at their school that would want to take that on with them, and they contact the Herren Project, and there is a kind of like a starter kit that gets sent out to the schools, and they begin, and then whatever Herren Project can do to help support them, you know, create that in their building, we do.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I'm going to call my granddaughter after we're done.
Perfect.
But we're here in Massachusetts, so because is it more prevalent in the Northeast, or are you just spread over the country pretty evenly?
I think it's probably, we're probably located more in the Northeast, but we're all over the country for sure. Texas, Ohio. I mean, there's schools all over there. They actually just awarded, I think like an after prom, like a scholarship for an after prom party or event, a sober, you know, and the applications came from all over the country. So.
All right. Well, that's good to know, because now I got a little plan of action here.
I love it. I love it.
And you know, with all that you've got going on, and I know there's so many aspects of this. You know, somebody who's in active recovery, talk about getting groups in high school students in particular or younger, but also to the other end of this. I don't say the grief aspect of all of this is, you know, when a family goes through this for years, often, or not. I mean, you know, I had a friend whose 19-year-old son died of a heroin overdose about 6 years ago, and they had no idea he was using. No idea. It just hit them like a ton of bricks, and they had caught so blindsided. So they did not go through the process that many families go through with the years and in and out of rehab, and that's torturous in itself. But whether someone is caught by surprise by a family member using, or they're enduring this for years, and then as a result, somebody dies of an overdose, the impact on that family going forward, they're never the same. And that's something that I know you deal with all the time. And sometimes I think you don't know how to work through that. And I think a lot of, from, again, is my own small observations, families that seek some support certainly will work through it. Because I guess what I've seen too is the effects on a family, whether it's divorce or other people using, and it's so sad to see how that problem doesn't just go away. But I think getting the support early on certainly helps a lot. To state the obvious, but
Yes, yes.
um,
Well, we know that human connection is healing.
yeah,
We, and that works the same way with grief, is that sharing our experiences with each other, it can be healing. So people are forever changed once they lose a loved one physiologically, how they see themselves in the world, how they see um, the world around them. Everything is just very different, and perspectives are very different. And to be able to sit in a room, whether that is in real life room or a virtual room on Zoom, to be able to share your story and see heads nodding and people being able to connect and feel the same and articulate that they've felt the same that you do is healing. That's the part, you said it, it's how people get through it. I don't think people get around grief or over it. They go through it, and it is a journey for the rest of their lives.
yeah. And you're right, connecting with others is so important. And then saying a perspective, and again, to use an overused phrase, you're not alone, but that's important because people do
Very,
feel that way, right?
very.
Um, and without talking, the depths of depression can just be devastating. And when you hear somebody else talking, sharing their story, you can relate to them. You start to you want to help them heal too. It's just different thing. If somebody who's going through it suddenly wants to help somebody else heal, it's amazing. It's therapeutic, but it really is an amazing thing to watch somebody who's going through their own personal um, devastating issue to turn and put their attention on someone else. Right?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So the first grief group I started was 6 years ago. They still meet every Tuesday night. And since then, we now actually run 6 grief groups a week at the Herren Project. So, and I feel like I could add additional ones and they would fill up. So that particular group has met every week for 6 years, and they have become family to one another. They probably 4 years ago wanted to all get together in person. So we did a weekend retreat in Newport for them, where they all got to get in a room together and actually do a group session, live. And they spent the weekend together, and then we repeated it. And when COVID hit, we weren't able to do it, but they then planned little things outside of that. And so they show up for each other at events, and they do speaking engagements for one another if they need, or recently they planned to have lunch and they invited me, which was wonderful. And so I got to sit with 17 people who love each other and have experienced the most horrible days of their lives, and are so grateful that they now have this other, additional family
The
to
family.
lean on.
Yeah.
It's the most beautiful, it gives me chills. It's the most beautiful, empowering experience I've ever had. And now there are 6 groups. So there are 6 clusters of those families. It's just incredible. Absolutely incredible.
And it can be tough. And I'm sure if somebody says, wow, you have to, Rebecca, you talk about grief and addiction and all these things, doesn't it wear you out? But I think the good side of that is to see what you just described. I mean, it's an incredible thing. And I think even with somebody sharing their stories, they've been through the depths of addiction, and often wanted to end their lives, and things are at the rock bottom, and then they come out and share their stories. It's wonderful to hear so inspiring to hear how they've just emerged from all that and now sharing their stories and helping people.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's
And that's
it's an absolute
rewarding.
gift.
It's
Yes,
rewarding for you, right?
it is. I mean, I wish, again, I'd love to not have. I'd love to that this work didn't have to exist.
Yeah.
But I am so grateful and in awe every week of all of the grief groups that I work and the family support groups that I work with, that they are brave and courageous and vulnerable to share their pain each week with one another, and then and allow me to witness it as well. It's people do ask me all the time, how do you talk about death and grief all the time? And I think we all have had those moments in our lives with a level of pain. And I just feel grateful that I get to be able to sit with people and be able to learn about their loved one and hear what their lives were like, and honor that. I think that's a I'm grateful that I am able to do that with them. So,
And you can see the wonderful things that come out of that too, right?
it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's the best of humans. I think it's when something horrible happens and then you watch people just embrace one another.
Mhm.
Again, I wish the pain part didn't have to happen. But we've had a number of people from our family support groups who have been on that roller coaster, that you described, the years of treatment. And I've always said it's the roller coaster they didn't buy the ticket for.
Yeah.
So they're just kind of doing the ups and downs along with their loved one. And we've had a number of members who have been active members in those support groups who have lost their loved ones, and then get invited to my grief group. And it is always just so interesting to watch the remaining members of the family support group grieve with them about the loss of their child, and then watch that person then enter a grief group and join a new realm of people who just love them up. So again, I think it's a glimpse into the best of humans, I think.
And and this is not a great analogy, but there's something that years ago when I got a divorce many years ago, and it was hard because my kids were young, and today my ex-wife and I get along. We're great friends, so it's all good. But at the time, it's very difficult. And I remember a marriage counselor saying, "I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how to. I'm distraught. Everything was a mess." And so he said, "Keep a journal, keep a diary." And I was like resistant at first. Keep a diary? What would I want to do that for? Anyway, I did, and I wrote down, and then every day it was anger, it was this, it was that, and then there was 6 months, a year, and I read back and I said, "My goodness, look how I've changed." And so, but you start to see you can get rid of that feeling, that person you were, that anger, and you see how you've evolved, how you've transformed over time. And I think even the groups should serve that same purpose. You can watch the transformation.
Absolutely. There are times that members will say that to one another, whether it's the grief groups or the family support groups, be able to say, "Wow, you know what? 2 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to say that to your child." Or
Yeah.
I can remember when you joined the group, you couldn't smile, and
Yeah.
you never knew whether you were going to smile again.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's why I do this work. There isn't anything that's more rewarding than watching people heal.
Yep.
So.
And in writing the book too, and I might have mentioned this to you before, hearing the stories, and out of the 8 stories, everybody doesn't recover and come back. We don't skip over the part of death because it's the reality. But in writing the stories, it took a lot out of me. I was crying when I was writing it. I said, "I can't do this anymore." Not just days, but weeks, months I had to take off because
Yes.
And I remember thinking I have a greater empathy and appreciation and respect for people like yourself who work with this every day. I had the ability to put it away and say, "I can't deal with this for 3 months." But I think in the end, putting everything together and then of course, even doing this program, hearing people, there is that aspect that makes you feel like, wow, people sharing their stories are therapeutic. And I've had so many people who talked on the podcast or shared the story in a book, and we've written it. They said, you know what? That felt great just to say it out loud and get it off my chest. And it's somewhat of it's energizing.
Yes. And I know I've said this to you before. I'm so grateful you did not shy away in your 8 stories from death,
Yeah,
as that is a reality of
yeah,
this. It's a fatal brain disease, substance use disorder. So
yeah,
to shy away from the grief part would be unfair. And so, and I've said this before, I'm very grateful you didn't. But it is important for all stories to be shared.
yeah,
So
yeah. It is so therapeutic, and I've seen it, and I wouldn't have known that as much without experiencing it. But and so yeah, believe me, and I still do. I have a great respect for what you do.
well, and I use we use your book certainly in a number of our groups in terms of encouraging members to tell their story. So whatever way works best for them. I've often said I'm going to write a book. Not really going to write, maybe I'll write a book, but that every family I've worked with has a chapter, and so similar to what you have done, which is everybody tells their story.
Yeah,
And families who have experienced grief have a wisdom that they didn't start off having. And that's important. So, I
yeah.
mean, I'm always saying, if you ever want to write your story, I know a guy. And so that's important for people to know that is healing for them to do.
And it's healing, and also too, what I found, and almost everyone has said, as awful as my story is, as much hell as I went through, if I share my story and if I help just one person, that'll be enough for me. And that's all I want to do now, is just
Yes.
for the purpose of helping somebody else. Bet you hear that a
Yes.
lot.
Well, and that's what Chris says. And everyone, I mean, if I reach one student, so one person, one family, that's that's what we strive for. And I think we all know certainly Chris we all have affected more than one, but each one is incredibly important.
Yep, yep. Well, that's great. And I know we could talk all day. And I know we've got to close out soon here. But is there anything that you want to mention about the Herren Project? Again, contact information for any listeners who want to find out more about the Herren Project and maybe the youth ambassador program.
Yeah. So everything about Herren Project can be found on our website. A couple of things that I would love to be able to share. We have a treatment team. So if there is anybody who is needing help finding treatment, finding a bed, finding services, please reach out. We have a team of, I'd say that they wear superhero capes. The people on that team, they are incredible. And so there's a toll-free number to our treatment team. People can call. It's on the website. I can certainly give it to you, but that's found on our website also. So please to reach out. There is help there. We have treatment centers that we have partnered with all over the country. So I don't want people to think they're limited in any area. So certainly for individuals, please reach out. For family members, there's over 20 online support groups every week for family members. It's all free. It's provided because we're a nonprofit. We get to do this work and provide all of this, our services for free. We have nightly recovery meetings for people who are either still actively using or who are in recovery. Those are free. They're accessible. The link is on the website. And then all of our education and prevention resources are there as well. So, and we all are very creative with our emails. It's our first name at herrenproject.org. So Rebecca at herrenproject.org. Kristen's our Director of Clinical Services, Kristen at herrenproject.org. So nothing fancy about it, but we're all easy to reach.
Easy to remember too. And
Yes.
we'll have it for the people watching. We'll have the website below. And if you're listening again, herrenproject.org, well, that's great information. And as we go along with this too, Rebecca, we'll have you back because I know we'll be talking along the way anyway.
I would love that. I would love that. It's so great to be able to finally do this with you, Mike. I appreciate
Thanks. Thank you very much. I appreciate it very much.
Always. Always.
Well, we'll be in touch. And to everybody listening, again, please visit the herrenproject.org. And thanks again for tuning in. See you all next week. And thank you again, not just to Rebecca, but to the Herren Project for joining us. And thank you to Chris for getting this whole thing started. Appreciate you all.
Thank you so much.
All right. See you soon. All right. Bye-bye.